Jack, thank you so much for spending some time with me.
No, not at all.
Um,
Yeah.
I wanted to give you some space to introduce yourself to the people who are listening and talk a little bit about your background with body expression and emotions since
Yeah.
you've come in with a long history.
Okay. I'm 74 years old. I've been through a lot of different physical practices, approaches, Alexander technique, Rolfing, Feldenkrais, you name it, I've sort of done it. Partly in pursuit of general sort of bodily health benefits, but also in my work. I've been an actor for 50 years and my body is my instrument, literally. So it's always been something that I've really put a lot of focus and attention on. And I've gone through so many different things. I've got to benefit from all of them in some way or another. But it was only when I've come to Sue's work and I just knew immediately as I read it that the language, the way things were being couched, the way things were being expressed absolutely made sense to me. So, in terms of my own personal life as well, emotional turmoils and stuff that I'm going through, and how useful this work has been in enabling me to handle enormous amounts of emotion in my work. It's part of my job to do that anyway.
Mhm.
And it's not something that I'm afraid of or that I find unpleasant. I love inhabiting emotion, I do. But some recent experiences have put me through some emotions which have been a tsunami, just overwhelming almost. I had to handle an enormous amount of emotion and feeling untethered and didn't know where I was, what was happening. And looking for grounding has been enormously, miraculously helpful in that area in terms of handling this thing that I'm going through, which was unexpected and is enormous to me. I'm not kind of having to hold myself up as much because I've been holding myself pretty tightly for quite a long time. And feelings I hadn't felt for a long time of just a certain amount of ease and a certain amount of openness and
Mm.
presence and being able to receive the world more.
Can you go back to your early training in theater and in
Yeah.
your learning to use this instrument? What sorts of things did you study and what did you learn along the way that really impacted you the most?
Well, the movement stuff that we did, I went to a drama school, and one of the major features of my drama school was a Laban based movement teacher,
Mm.
a very well known Swedish international ballet dancer he'd been. And as he got older, he'd got much more interested in acting and the expressiveness beyond dance. And so he moved into developing his own form of movement or conception of movement based on Laban's working actions and
Mhm.
how that could translate into the creation of character on stage. Laban was, his first approaches, I think, were to do with how the human body functions and works in terms of the kinds of energies that it can be used for. And a lot of it was done in terms of behaviors in the workplace and different kinds of businesses that required some very sort of light and delicate touches, some that were much more dynamic kinds of activities. So it was very much around a working life, and he developed what he called working actions
Mm.
to describe what the movement of energy was through any given kind of a combination, all of which are very useful for an actor in terms of your physical life.
Mm.
He collaborated with someone called William Carpenter, and they developed, and dancers became very interested in Laban's work and his description and conception of how physical energy manifested expressively through the body. And Malmgren, the Swedish teacher that I had at Drama Center, had developed his own system based on those conceptions with a bit of Jung added in.
Mm.
If you looked at most characters or well-written characters in a play, I'll give you a couple of examples. Any character who had a great stability and a great kind of authority and so on, you could explore that through the combination of weight, that's giving to gravity, flow, weight and space. Space he conceived of as a sort of mental energy. So
Mm.
you might get, someone like Abraham Lincoln or somebody like that, who has an enormous stability and you can feel the thought happening.
Mm.
And other characters who are more emotional, you would concentrate more on the flow, the emotional flow combined
Mm.
with weight. So not to get lost in the miasma of that, characters could be produced and recognizably, coherently express themselves by conceiving of it as a combination of these different kinds of energies. some inner and then the outer expression of what the inner life was experiencing. It generated an awareness in me of not just where my default use of energy was, which in some ways can be quite fixed, you know. And as an actor, you don't want to be fixed. You want to be able to fix something to express it cleanly and clearly. I became aware of certain blockages in my ability to be flexible as an actor, physically flexible, but also the ability to enter into different characters.
Mm.
Some I found much more difficult, either because there was an emotional element to it which I couldn't reach in myself, or whatever. So it became very clear to me that it was hugely bound up with the body, and the moving of energy through the body was the emotional life and the ability to freely express whatever that character is being demanded to express. So that's where my focus came on that. But as with all things, and I think that I've mentioned to you before this conversation, Sue, I worked far too hard at it. And another of the things I've learned in this work is very much to come back to feeling the inner connections and the energy connecting and moving, and knowing that when that's happening, it just feels right, you know. And I've had to discipline myself quite a lot to, as I'm using the word discipline again, but to pull away from too much effort and too much
Yeah.
wanting to achieve a certain
Yeah.
range of movement or effect or whatever. And I found strangely that has sort of bled into my acting in the sense of not worrying so much as I did about what the effect was of what I was doing, what I'm doing when I'm on stage or on camera, more about what's happening in a coherent way inside, and letting the audience and the camera sort of
Mm.
come to that as opposed to
Yeah.
me. I
Yeah.
was quite skillful at creating a performance, you know. I used to get quite anxious about it because, of course, you create something and it feels immediately it could go wrong, you could forget it.
Mm.
Whereas when you're simply being as much as you can, present as much as you can, it feels safer, it's more open, and the audience can connect to you more. And strangely, letting go of the control and wanting to know what you're doing at every second, which some actors thrive on, but I don't think in the end produces the most affecting work. And it was a great relief to think, oh yeah, I can feel safe. I can feel safe just being here, being seen, really seen, not curating what was being seen. Now, this is what I want people to see, but just to be seen as a human
Yeah,
in the
that's so
situation.
interesting. That's life. We
Yeah,
work too hard, we effort too hard, we try to present ourselves in a certain way.
yeah,
And when you're seen and you feel comfortable being seen,
yeah,
something opens up in that moment.
yeah,
And when it's not curated, and this is why, I'm working more towards having that spontaneous, authentic expression that comes from your
yeah,
visceral core body, that it's not something that you need to ruminate or flourish or build upon. The essence of it can come up really clearly and immediately when the holding back and the protection and the fear is put to the side. Yeah,
I
and it's
think
just
so.
it's just easier.
Yeah, and I think that's it. There was a phrase being used at my drama school all the time, which was leave yourself alone. Leave
Mm.
yourself, just leave yourself. And I never quite understood what he meant by that, you know, but I do now. And I think that what you're saying resonates really, really strongly. It's there. It's to get out of the way more than it is to impose. And on stage, that's get out of the way. Let the thing come through you and let people, that's what people want to see. They don't want to see me and my personal angst.
Because sometimes people go all the way one way. It's like, okay, so I just have to like get out of the way and not be. And then, so what are you if you're not putting on a performance? Because there's a sociologist who says you are the product of your performances. And that in the core, there is no core there. There's just an emergent collective experience that you create through your interactions with your environment.
Yeah.
So there's a balance there between like, how do you show up? You have to participate. The
Yes.
participation creates some sort of tension that is interesting. Because
Yes.
otherwise, if you're just this fixed prism, and you
Yeah.
let the light through, it's like you're fixed. And
Oh yeah, no, I see what you're saying.
yeah.
And when I mean to get out of the, I don't mean to get out of the way in the sense of, oh, just behind a blank page and it all just sort of comes comes through. I think some of the terms are old-fashioned, but it's more like giving yourself or giving people access to what used to be some sort of called your unconscious.
Hmm.
And it's not formless, it's not random. There's coherence, there's inner coherence there. And I think that the focus of my work now, as opposed to trying to stick something together and create something that I then sort of push out to the audience, is very much more to do with allowing whatever arises to be part of what's being expressed, if that makes sense. It's a strange sort of alchemy. I don't want to get grandiose about it, but there is something about coherent things arise. Your imagination
Mm.
or your inner life produces coherent things, if that makes any sense, as opposed to it's trying not to be too conscious. I think a lot of acting now is far too conscious. You
Mm.
find your beats, you find your action, you find your objective, and you're all in your head going, what's my beat, what's my action? And all that is useful, but it has to be. I think one of the things that resonated for me in your work was this isn't about sitting in your room perfecting your relaxation.
Right.
It's about enabling yourself to be in a place where you can connect and engage. And
Yeah.
that tension you're talking about,
Yeah.
that's life going on. You're
Yes.
connecting
Yes.
with the world and your environment. Now that's where you want to be. It's not a place of Zen calm. That's a
Yeah.
nice place to be sometimes. But in terms of acting and the way that you describe your work, as the purpose is to stand and walk in the world, that resonates very much with what performers should be doing. You're being in the world under imaginary circumstances, but behaving truthfully and engaging with your fellow actor.
Mm.
And I do a lot of improv as well, and the energy that the audience come to engage with is what's going on between actors connecting. Not I say my line, you say I do my
Yeah.
performance, you do your. It's this being present to the other human. There is nothing like being in the room for the connection to the people with whom you are interacting. The energy that you pick up and what you're able to see. I mean, not just see, but when you talk about listening, whole body
Mhm.
listening and so
Yeah.
on, what
Yeah.
you're able to see and sense in people is completely different. I think
Sure.
there's absolutely no way that you can ever replace what theatre and that kind of activity offers. Is absolutely unique in
Mm.
its live element. It's not mediated through anything else. It's live in the room. It's happening now. And I suppose whatever work you have to do is, as opposed to constructing something, is to try and be always bringing yourself into presence and connection. And the work is really managing all the stuff that wants to pull you away from that. The stories that you so eloquently talk about, our own personal stories,
Yeah.
interfering with the more objective, real thing happening. The experience which really brought this into focus and drove me, in a sense, to be taking further steps in the area of this was my separation. My 30-year relationship sort of disintegrated for various reasons. And that brought into huge, like terrifying focus my personal stories. It wasn't just the breakup. What I discovered, and as anybody's been through it will probably know, you're kind of thrown back on yourself and who you really are, and away from what you've sort of developed with your partner over the years, which has many positive things, but can also have dependencies and
Mhm.
expectations from them about certain things and the way one reacts to certain behaviors from them. And I was absolutely thrown back on some really, really strong sort of historical, what I would describe as negative. I think it's all material. And as an actor, I don't reject material.
Mhm.
But it's what you're saying is you need to be able to surf this stuff as opposed to have it sort of running you ragged. you
Yeah.
know. I think your work goes way beyond just grounding. Well, that was my first sort of focus.
Yeah.
How can I not be blown apart and blown away by all this? My personal stories, my childhood, my father was violent and all sorts of other things in the environment were terrifying. All that was sort of really provoked after my breakup by being thrown back and feelings of loneliness or abandonment or desperation about being alone, all sorts of things. And that finding the more objective connection down to what I think you've in the past called the universal body, that has been a major thing in enabling me to get some perspective on all this storm going on,
Mm.
not to suppress it, repress it, get rid of it or anything, but be able to breathe in it and relate to it and make sense of it and not be crushed by it,
Mm.
not be destroyed by it, because I felt quite close to this could destroy me, you know.
Mm. Mm.
It's 30
Yeah.
years of, so that element of the more objective sort of universal body finding its gravity, finding myself. Oh, I'm just standing here and feeling more of a kind of more space inside
Hmm.
for all this stuff to go, as opposed to I'm sort of locked in this tube of like rushing emotion and
Mm.
pain and so on, really. But it's there, but there's a bit more room to sort of just be, you know.
Yeah. And that's the definition of presence, more
Yeah,
space for everything, more space for all the fears of the future and the regrets of the past, but a
yeah,
bigger container that
yeah,
lets you take a step away from the, heat so you can look at it
yeah,
and you
exactly
could
that.
understand it and make sense of it.
Sometimes doing the standing meditation, quite big emotions are rising. And I think some of the imagery, another thing about your work, you know, I've done so many different things where people have told me what the right way to do it is and felt that I failed because I couldn't
Mm.
couldn't do what they was asking me to do. But if I worked harder, I would. But your search for different languages and different ways of expressing and different entry points into the whole sort of holistic system of ourselves has been really, really useful to pull away from things if they're not enabling enough, you know,
Mm.
awareness or so, and take another entry point. One of the things that you've talked about is something like emotions arising, it's coming up, it's coming up, it's coming up. Normally, if you're suppressing it, or you won't let yourself arrive at the point where you can engage or allow it to kind of integrate or whatever. And I think I'm looking forward to the Saturday workshop because I think I haven't paid a lot of attention to what I can do with the inner personal story.
Mm.
Got some space on it, and I've got some recognition of it, and some of it I've made friends with, if that makes
Oh yeah.
any
Yeah. But
sense. We have such courage and in the energy we put into these things, which in the end were to protect us but no longer serve us. But God, we've worked hard and relentlessly in the face of panic or terror or
Mhm.
sadness or whatever. And where should all that energy be going?
So that's
It's
a really good question because if you like to feel that energy and that makes you feel like, great, I'm working hard and that means that I'm doing a good job, when that goes away, what does that mean if you don't have that feeling? And that is one of those resistance points that you need like something that pulls you along. That's that
yeah,
whole finger exercise. It's about being connected to an intention, not the intention of getting rid of what's bothering you, but the intention that actually pulls you forward, that
yes,
makes you want to move forward and
exactly.
consolidate the energy towards that.
Yeah.
And
But something that is real. I mean, something that is real to
oh,
you.
to
I've found
yeah.
that with acting, that a lot of actors who are driven by a lot of ambition earlier on, and ego and so on, there's a limit to where that can take you. But if that starts to fall away, I've known actors and humans in other situations who then get a little bit lost because, well, what's driving me now then? What I mean by real is well, you're stopping with the more neurotic sort of manifestations of the
Mm,
success, the reviews, or whatever it is. So what's driving you? And it has to be something much more authentic to you.
like
It
on a,
feels gentler, more truthful, but it's not you feel, "Oh, I'm not driving,
yeah.
but actually that's not an effective way of driving, you know.
Yeah, and I think of it more as like clarity.
Yeah.
You could still put a lot of energy to it, but
Oh
it'll
yeah.
be
Yeah.
cleaner because it's
Yeah.
going into a very specific place. I think you've probably heard me talk about awareness being like turning the lights on, and then attention turning the spotlight on, and then
Yeah.
intention is like the laser beam. To have the clarity of intention requires a certain consolidation
Yeah.
of your mind.
Has to be clear of all these other things that drive you in different ways.
Yeah. The whole point with the finger exercise, the making a choice exercise, is that clarity doesn't mean that everything else goes away, but everything kind of finds its level of focus.
Yeah.
One comes, it pops
Yeah.
out and is emergent. Everything else is still there, but
Yeah.
it's just not distinct because it's not in your focal vision. That's the duality of being present with both, that we struggle with when we try to over focus or over effort on
Yeah.
a single
Yeah.
point.
And that all makes a lot of sense to me in work, but in life as well.
Yeah. Do you have an example of something that happened in your acting that changed?
I found recently with the last three or four things, being able to just come back to a bit more connection and so on, well, a lot more connections. I was far less worried about how I was coming across.
Mm,
What were the audience seeing? Was I getting it right? Do people like me?
mm, yeah,
Do they think what I'm doing is good? All
mm,
these things would get in the way of you actually doing what you're there to do. And I have found with the last two or three things, I've been much more able just to be in the world on stage, knowing you're in a very artificial sort of setup environment, but just to be in that with all the right intentions that you need to have and the clarity about what you want in the scene and all that, and how the audience are responding, and you're one part of you's listening for that, but without all this interference going on
mm.
all the time, which is sort of getting in the way of simply being there and allowing the story to be told, being the agent of the story. And the last three or four things that I've done, I've come off thinking, yeah, it's not that I miss it, but I think, yeah, where's that sort of slightly jagged, anxious energy that I'm used to having as an actor. And I thought, actually, this feels more enjoyable. I know what's happening. Sometimes that's still fun to do that, but the sensation of more ease in it, I just thought, oh my God, this is just enjoyable, and it doesn't feel so high risk, in the wrong way,
Mm.
which is in a sort of ego way. This doesn't, I'm happy to be looked at, I'm happy to be seen. If something's sort of going wrong, things always go wrong on stage in one way or another.
Mhm.
It's okay. I can respond to that. I don't get panicked. And I can incorporate what's happening into whatever the life on stage is. And I've had that the last two or three things I've done, which is quite remarkable. That change from a slightly wired anxiety and tension that it generates, not a tension of being poised and ready, but a tension that is nervous. And to have moved into a place where I'm actually looking forward to going out on stage.
Mm. Mm, that's great. And how was that received?
Yeah, paradoxically, if I was after any sort of approval, you know, I wasn't chasing it, but I got a lot more what I would have previously called approved after the show about what I was doing than perhaps I normally. I usually get pretty good response
Uh-huh.
to what I do because I'm very careful about what I do. But this was and the difference really was for me was that's nice to hear that, but I don't need to hear that.
Mm,
I'm not hanging out
mm.
in the bar afterwards hoping someone will come and tell me how wonderful I was at the show. It didn't feel that sort of slightly neurotic need, which I
Yeah.
think all actors have to a degree, quite get away from it. The response, I think, was notably sort of warmer and appreciative in a way which was sort of gentler. It's in the way of you skillfully being able to use those kinds of energy when it's
Yeah.
appropriate, but But if you're there because as a human you're frightened and anxious about all sorts of things that are nothing to do with the job you're here
Yeah.
to do,
Yeah. That's the
um,
key.
then
Yeah.
that's not so great. Get that edge, yes, but be a human in that. You
Mm.
know where you can use that edge, you be in control of it a bit more, just as technique, you know. If any of that makes sense,
Yeah,
that's
no, that's
kind of how.
fabulous. That, applies to everything, right? Be a
Yeah,
human first, and then you could apply the technique, and you
yeah,
you have that flexibility. If you're a human first, you have that
yeah, exactly.
emotional and perceptual flexibility to apply something with intention instead of
Yeah,
just it happening to you and you're trying to fight your way out of paper bag.
yeah, exactly that. Just in general, in sort of my social life and so on, going around, I've had to reconstruct my social life a little bit since my
Mm,
breakup because I'd
yeah.
invested so much in the relationship. I sort of neglected a bit
Mm,
friendships,
mm.
social. I think I'm just a bit more, I feel a bit more approachable now. With previous vibes I've had, I'm the last person on the bus that people sit next to. I don't know what that's about, but I've noticed it's a thing. Just my personal appearance and so on can be a little forbidding, and I'm tall and I'm rather intense sometimes. But I think I noticed in my general and social life that I think people find me more approachable and it's a bit more clear to them.
Like, what is your son, for instance? Has he noticed anything? Has anything changed?
He's living with me at the moment, but he said to me the other day, he said, I never thought I'd say this about you, but recently you've just had a really sweet quality about you. You know, I thought, people don't usually call me sweet. I'm quite spiky, but, or I have been, no, I still am. And then my son came to stay with me, and that's been a spiritual journey. I've had to
You.
work really hard to share the space, check things that I get annoyed about normally. So he's been a teacher for me in a way. People are more comfortable around me, I think,
Mm,
than they might have been in the past, and I'm more comfortable around them, you know.
mm, mm.
So generally, um, just going about the world, it feels warmer and a bit more friendly, you know, and I'm more open with people that I come across in the course of traveling about, working, and so on.
Mm,
Willing to just engage with people
mm. That's good.
spontaneously as opposed to stay out of my space. And
Uh,
that's enjoyable actually to find myself doing that.
I think a lot of those hard boundaries are there's just no more bandwidth left. You're
Yeah,
just trying to hold it together and
exactly that.
yeah, yeah.
Exactly that.
So it's
Yeah,
nice to have that soften a bit.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Jack. I really appreciate you taking time. It's been nice chatting with you.
Well, lovely to speak to you.